Good evening. So, talking about electronic databases and its basic features, right? So, we took two classes for databases and covered some of the basics of some of the components of electronic database, especially electronic databases, not manual database, right? During these two classes, we discussed so many things, but the things which we discussed at the latter part of the last class may be very important. So just a quick recap on what we had on the other day. So in the last class, we talked about tables, right? So I told you that table is a vital component in a database for storing the data, right? Table is for storing the data. So in a table, the vertical components, which we call columns, right? The columns are called fields. Every row is a record in a table. Here we don't use the word row, it is a record, right? So a typical table in a database is a combination of fields and records, right? So, and also we talked about data types, right? There can be several data, several types of data which can be saved in a table. Especially, we discussed 5 different data types. There may be more than 5, but we discussed about 5 most commonly used data types, starting from text. We talked about numbers. What else? Date or time, currency, and Boolean. Right? These are the 5 commonly used data type. But as I mentioned earlier, there may be more than these data types. Right? There may be more than this. Right? Maybe around 10 or 11 data types possible. But here, these are the most commonly used data types. Okay. So I took enough time to explain these things on the other day. Hope you all understood that those things, right? So today we will have to move to another important chapter, another important area in this unit that is called keys in a database, right? Or keys. Okay, let's take that part now. Look, so this is another vital area in database. Try to understand everything clearly, because hereafter everything will be very important for exams, especially this part, right? Keys. Without understanding the keys, you cannot understand the further areas, right? Here we have some other areas in the database. For understanding them, this is important, right? Keys are important, right? So first of all, we should understand the term key, right? That is important. In English, the term key is very commonly used word, right? Commonly spoken word, right? So key is something which refers very important things. If I want to mention some of the hardware component, so I can ask you to mention key components, right? What are the key components of the computer? So here, what does the term key mean? Very important components. So even in some other cases, you can be asked to write key factors. What are the key factors for deciding that one or any other things? So key is something which refers very important things, right? Very important things. So even take a look at the metal key that you use to open your door, right, or close your door. That is that small component, that small metal component takes the name key because that small component operates the whole building, house. So imagine that big house is controlled or is operated by a small metal object. That is the one, that's the reason why it is called key, because that is very important. That is very important for controlling or for safeguarding your home. So that is key. Again, see, small metal equipment or metal component can operate your car, your bus or your vehicle. So that vehicle may have so many parts, so many components, but without this small metal component, right, it doesn't work, right? So that's why it is key. So try to understand that key is referring very important things, right? If you want to refer some most important things, use the word key, right? Okay, now come to the point. So as I describe here, key is nothing. Key is a field in a table of a database, right? Key refers a field in a table of a database. So just check a quick recall. So in a database, as we discussed, there may be many tables. So if you take a table, there may be many fields. Some fields, or maybe one or two fields, which have some special characteristics, can be called keys. I take it again. Key is a field in a table. That's a very simple description. But not all the fields in a table can be keys. You can't call all the fields as keys. Some of the fields which meet some requirements or which satisfy some requirements can be called keys. I tell you the requirements or the basic requirements or basic needs later, not now, but not for this moment. Remember, not all the fields can become as keys. Some of the fields which may have some unique characteristics or special characteristics can be taken as keys. So this is the idea, but later we can polish that, we can modify that, right? So at this moment you have to take that key as a field, right? For now, key is a field. Okay, later I will describe. Okay, there may be many keys in a database. In fact, there may be many keys in a table, right? So there is a key, right? There is a key called primary key. I will explain about primary key little later. Let me list down everything now. There is another one called composite primary key. This is another key. Everything is a field, right? In your mind, you must remember that now. Even though I named that as primary key or composite primary key or whatever, everything is a field. But we can't call all the fields as primary key. We can't mention every field as composite primary key. So there should be some aspects we have to focus on, right? I will explain those aspects and characteristics little later. Then there is another one called foreign key, right? That is another one. We have candidate key, another field, and finally alternate key. So I have listed 5 keys here, but there may be more than 5 keys available in a table, but here I have listed 5. But even though I have 5 keys, the first 3 are included in our syllabus. That's why I have shown them in a different color. So these are important for you, not candidate key or alternate key, right? If you can remember that those names, but they are not important for you, right? So we have to understand primary key, composite primary key, and foreign key. Okay, so now you have only one thing about them, which is they are fields, right? Other than that, I didn't mention anything about keys, right? Keys are fields. Okay, let's understand everything one by one. Listen to me, we have to understand everything clearly, right? Look here. So let's take the primary key first. and also primary key is very important for database or for a table, right? Let's define the word primary key first. Listen to me first. You can read and understand the things later. Listen to me first. So let me define the word primary key first. After that, I will explain that definition with the help of an example. Then only you can understand, right? So primary key is nothing, is a field. So first of all, primary key is a field which is used to identify every record in a table. I repeat it. Listen to me. Primary key is a field, right, which is used to identify each record, every record in a table. That's it. Very simple description, right? So without further description, take a look at this table. Listen to me. You have to understand carefully. I repeat my definition for primary key again. Primary key is a field which is used to identify every record in a table uniquely. Right, look here. So in this table, you have admission number. This is a field. You have first name, another field. You have last name, another field. Right, you have 3 fields. So you know about records, right? So what is the first record? This is the first record. S100 Pereira Vimukti. This is the first record. S105 Ramesh Karan. This is the second record. S106 Meena Vimal. Third record. S107 Ramesh Vimal. Fourth record. So in this table, as I just mentioned, we have 3 fields in the name of admission number, ADNO, first name, last name, and 4 records. Records are horizontal things, which are rows, and fields are vertical things, which can be columns. Okay, right. So let's take my definition for the primary key again. What did I mention about primary key? Primary key is a field which is used to identify every record uniquely, right? Listen to me, right? For some time, forget about this table, right? Just forget this table and listen to my situation, right? I'm going to tell you one important thing, right? So assume I have 50 students in front of me, right? I'm in a class. There are 50 students in the class. Listen to me very carefully, right? So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to identify every student. Assume I am marking the register or something, right? I'm marking the register. So I'm going to identify every student who are sitting in front of me, right? Okay. So, you know, these students have, assume they have the admission number, they have their name, which means first name, they have the last name, they have the date of birth, age. So as students, they have many characteristics, right? Listen to me. Now I want to identify a person, right? This is my first person to be marked. So now I just called his name. Assume his name is Vimal. So I told you, I asked Vimal, right? I called the name Vimal. So when I called Vimal, I could see 2 students stood up, right? Now there are 2 students standing. But I called one name, Vimal, but I can see there are 2 students who are standing in front of me. The thing is, both students have the same name. They are 2 different students, but they have the same name. So when I used to call Vimal, both of them stood up. So in this case, I was unable to identify the particular person. Have you understood? I wanted to identify a particular Vimal. That's why I have spoken the word. I have called the word. But suddenly, I could see that there are 2 students stood up. So in this case, I couldn't identify the particular person. So what's the conclusion? Name is not used for identifying the person. When I use the name, there may be so many people in the same name. So I couldn't identify. Okay. So after thinking for a second, I called the age of a person. I just called the age, right? I requested the student to stand up. I requested the student whose age is, 15 or something. So when I call 15, again, there may be many students who can stand up. Because, in that particular 15, there are many students. They all belong to the same age. So now there are many people standing up. So in this instance, I'm unable to identify that particular person. I wanted to identify a person, right? One person. That's why I used his age. But unfortunately, I couldn't because many students belong the same age. So understand, age cannot be used for identifying the person. Have you understood? Even if I call the address, assume I used to call the address. I called the address and asked the students to stand up. I asked the student who belongs that address to stand up. Even in this case also, I can be disappointed because it is possible that more than one student can come from one address. Assume there are, twin brothers or twin sisters. So there are two, but both of them belong to one address. So when I use the address, I can see two students standing up. Even though it is a rare case, it is possible. So in this instance, address is not. So after thinking some minutes, I call the admission number. Assume every student has an admission number or registration number or something. I call the registration number. Now only that expected person, only that relevant person stood up. I couldn't see any other people to stand because in that particular admission number, only one person is registered, right? So even if I call another admission number, again, another person stands up, not many. So what's the conclusion? I cannot identify a particular person using name. I cannot identify a particular person using address. I cannot identify a person using age. But I could identify a person using admission number. Have you understood? Now come to the point, right? Listen to me. Come here. So again, to explain, the term, explain primary key, I need the definition again. So what did I mention about primary key? Primary key is a field used to identify each record, right? Okay, look here. So this is the record, first record. This is the second record, right? This is the first record. This is the second record. Here, this is the third record. And this is the fourth record. Right. Look here, to identify the first record, I'm going to identify the first record. Before we identify the first record, take a look at the first record carefully. What is first record? S100, Pereira, Vimukti. What is it? It is exactly a person. This is a person, right? In the first record, there is a person, registered. In my previous example, in my real world example, students were sitting in front of me. If I take one student, that student has admission number, that student has first name, that student has last name, age, so on. Exactly same as that. Here, the record is, even in the first record, the admission number there, first name there, last name there, even there may be age. The next field may be age. So there may be an age. So in my real world example, I couldn't identify a person using using name, first name or last name. I couldn't identify that person using age. So similarly, to identify this record, first record means first person. So if you want to identify the first record, tell me, can you use the first name? No. Can you use the last name? No. Even can you use age? No. So to identify the first record, right? To identify the first record, what is important? S100. If I call S100, right? Assume there are students sitting in front of me. If I call S100, only one student stands up. Similarly, here many students are in the table. For sample purpose, for demonstration purpose, I have only 4 records. But there may be many records, right? There may be many records to come. But for demonstration purpose, I have only 4 records, right? So try to compare my real world example with the table. In real world example, there are students, right? In front of me, students are sitting. In this table, every record has a student. So in my real world example, to identify a person, I use the admission number. So similarly, to identify the first record, which means first person. So what is important? S100 is important. Look here, to identify the second record, you have to use S105. You cannot use Ramesh because Ramesh is a name. There may be many Ramesh possible. There may be many Karen possible. Here Karen is entered only one, but as I discussed earlier, there may be many Karens, right? So if I use S105, the second record is identified. Even if I use S106, I can identify the third record. If I use S107, I can identify the fourth record. So in this table, to identify every record, what is important? This admission number is important. This admission number field is important. That field is called primary key. First name cannot be a primary key because first name cannot be used for identifying each record. Last name cannot be used as primary key because again the reason is same, it cannot be used for identifying the records. But of course admission number can be the primary key because this admission number can be used for identifying each record, right? So that's why it is the primary key. Okay, so this is the idea. If it is a now look at the definition. A primary key is a column, which means field. It's a field in a table that uniquely identifies records in the table, right? So never ever memorize, right? Just understand there is a table with many fields, many records. You need to identify every record, right? To identify every record, there may be a field used. That field is called primary key. Not all the fields can do that. In my previous case, first name couldn't do that. Last name didn't do that, but admission number did it. So that's why admission number is the primary key. Okay, right. So if you want to take a field as a primary key, that field must satisfy 2 requirements. I repeat it. If you want to take a field in a table as primary key, note that you can't take all the fields as primary key because primary key field must have some qualifications, must have some eligibility. So whenever you want to set as a primary key, you have to consider 2 important things. The fields which satisfy those 2 things can be primary key, right? So what is the first one? The one which I discussed earlier. it must contain unique values. It must contain unique value, which means the particular field cannot have duplicate values, right? That field cannot have duplications, which means data cannot be repeated. Look here. In this example, you couldn't select first name as primary key. You didn't select last name as primary key. What's the reason? The first name can have duplication. There may be another Pereira. See, as I mentioned earlier, there may be hundreds of records. This Pereira may be repeated many times. So if there are many Pereiras, then how can you identify the record? Look here, I have many Pereiras in front of me. Assume there are many students whose name is Pereira. So when I use the word Pereira, when I ask Pereira to stand, I can see that many Pereiras who can stand up. So in this particular instance, I couldn't identify the particular Pereira. Similarly, here you cannot identify the Pereira because Pereira can be repeated. So that may be the reason why you didn't select first name, because first name can have duplication. Even last name can have duplication. But you selected admission number as primary key because admission number never be duplicated. S100 cannot be entered again. S105 cannot be entered again because that belongs to Pereira. That number never be given to another student. So that must be unique, right? So that is primary key here. Have you understood? So that is the first requirement which a primary key field should have, right? What is it? Having unique data, which means no duplication, right? Or no repetition, right? That must be unique, okay? Right. But that is not yes, that is the eligibility, but that is not enough. If a field has unique data, it doesn't mean that it is eligible for being primary key. There should be one more rule, or there should be one more requirement to be satisfied, right? So let me take that now. Right, look here. Listen to me. In this table, assume this second student, which means Ramesh, doesn't have admission number. So assume this person wasn't given admission number. For some reason, he didn't get the admission number. All the other students have. Pereira is 100, Meena is 106, Ramesh is 107. But Ramesh doesn't have any admission number, right? Due to some reasons, admission number wasn't due, right? Okay, right. So now listen to me very carefully. This is important. Right, so let's identify the first record. To identify the first record, I can use S100. So when I use the word S100, when I ask S100, I know that the first record is identified, like the real world example, right? There are students, I call S100, so that particular student only, stood up. So I am satisfied. I identified the person using S100. So the Pereira is identified. Right. Let's move to the third one. Later we will take the second one. Go to the third one. To identify the third record, yes, I can use the word S106. In real world example, when I use or when I ask 101, S101, I know that Meena stands up. So in this case, I was able to identify the person using S100. Look at the last one. When I use S107, I could identify Ramesh, right? But look at the second one. Can you identify this person, or can you identify the second record with that admission number. No, not for the second person, admission number is not there. It is empty, right? There is nothing. So now my question is, how can you identify the second person? How can you identify this record? How? Can you use the name? Can you use the word Ramesh? No, there may be many Ramesh. Even in this sample example, there is another Ramesh. So when I use the word Ramesh, when I ask Ramesh, there are two students stand up. Even Karen cannot be. In this sample record, Karen is entered only once, but Karen can be many times. So I cannot use Karen for identifying that record. So, what's the conclusion? I couldn't identify the second record because first name cannot be used, last name cannot be used, even admission number cannot be used because admission number is empty here. How can I identify the second record with empty data? It is impossible. So now you have a problem because this is against to the definition of the primary key. What is primary key? A field which is used to identify every record in a table. Okay, the first record is identified by S100, which is admission number. Sorry. The third record is identified by S106. That is also admission number. The last record also identified by S107. That is also admission number. But that admission number cannot be used to identify the second record. So if it is not used for identifying the second record, then how can you say that it is a primary key? It is impossible, right? So that's a problem. So what is the second eligibility, second requirement? A primary key field must have, right? A primary key field must have data. It cannot be empty. Take a look at this. It cannot contain null values. Null value means empty value, empty data. So if you are trying to select a primary key, make sure that have a data. If it has empty cells, it cannot be selected as a primary key. It must have data, right? So these two fields, these two requirements are very important before you selecting as a primary key. The fields which satisfy these two eligibilities, these two requirements can be or can become as a primary key. What are the two eligibilities? Having unique data, no duplication. That is first one. What's the second one? The data must not be empty. There should be data in the field, right? So they are the two things. Okay, right. Now come to the table, right? So in this case, in this table, the admission number can be selected as primary key. Why? It has both requirements, so both eligibilities. Does it have unique data? Yes, look here, S100 never be repeated. There may be hundreds of records. Again and again, I tell you, don't think that this table has only 4 records. There may be hundreds records follow. For demonstration purpose only, I took 4 records. There may be hundreds of data. But among them, you know, S100 never be repeated because that is given for one student. So I can confirm that admission number satisfies my first requirement, which is having unique data. And look here, this admission number doesn't have any null values. This admission number doesn't have any empty spaces. So it is primary key, right? Admission number is the primary key. First name cannot be, even last name cannot be. Have you understood? This is the idea behind primary key. So look at the description. Admission number is the primary key in the above table. as it identifies the records uniquely. Okay, so what is primary key? The field which is used to identify every record in a table is called primary key. Primary key is nothing, it's a field. But you can't call all the fields as primary key. You have to call the fields or field which identify every record uniquely as a primary key. Okay. So what are the two eligibilities for a primary key field? Having unique data, which means no duplication. Second one, cannot have empty data, right? It must have data. Okay, right. Listen to me after at the end of the class, I will ask some questions, right? So you have to listen to me, right? So see, now let's go to the composite primary key. Right now we are moving to the second key called composite key, or sometimes called composite primary key, right? Look here, look at this table. There is a table which has admission number, right? Subject number, marks. So admission number, as a short I put ADNO, subject number in short SUBNO, and marks. Okay, right. So now let's select the primary key. Okay, let's identify the primary key. Look at the first field, admission number. In the previous case, in the previous table, admission number was taken as primary key because it satisfied the two requirements. But I'm not trying to say that admission number is the primary key in all the situations. Never ever, right? I'm not trying to say like that. In that particular table, admission number was set as primary key because it satisfied those two requirements. It had unique data as well as it didn't contain any empty data. That's why it was taken as primary key. But in some other tables, admission number cannot be set as primary key because it violates those rules, right? So let's look at this table. In this instance, I cannot take admission number as primary key. Why? Look at the data. See this 1001, right? 1001 entered twice, which means admission number doesn't have unique data, right? Admission number has duplication. It has repeating data. It means no unique data. So it is not the primary key, right? Admission number cannot be a primary key. Right, so now admission number is not. So let's check the other fields because you need a primary key in a table. So whenever you have a table, you definitely have to pick a primary key. Then only you can have some advantages. See, take a look at every individual. So you have name, you have, address, you have age, you have date of birth. You have so many characteristics. But for us, name or address or date of birth or age are useless for identifying you. Because you, as people or as teachers, we need to identify you. We cannot identify you by your name because your name is duplication. Your name has duplication. There may be many people who can have your name. So we cannot use your name, we cannot use your address or date of birth or other things. So we use your admission number or registration number. Similarly, in this table, the first field wasn't satisfied, right? That doesn't satisfy the rules, so it is not primary key. So if it is not primary key, go to the second field and check whether it has the ability to become as a primary key. Okay, look at the subject number. Can it become as a primary key? Again, no. The answer is no. Why? Look here, duplication is very clear. 80 registered twice. 82 registered twice. So when subject number has duplication, it never be set as primary key. So look the marks, go to the marks. So subject number can't be. Look at the marks. 76, 88, 90, 87. Now, this seems to be unique. Of course, this has unique data, but you have to understand one thing very clearly. As I mentioned so many times earlier, this table has many records. There may be hundreds, even there may be thousands. But here we have only sample records, 4 records. It doesn't mean that this table has only 4 records. There may be many records. So how can you say that the marks is unique? Even, so assume there may be another person whose number is 1006, right? For a subject like 82, that person can have 90 marks. This is possible, right? This is practically possible, right? 1006, a person, 82 is a subject number. He got 90 marks, which means duplication is possible. Look here, right? You have duplication 90 there. Right. So what about this? Is it possible? Can you select now if it is 90, right? If 90 repeated, can you select marks as a primary key? No. So now none of the fields have the eligibility to become as primary key. Admission number not, because it has unique data. Sorry, it has duplication. Subject number cannot be because it doesn't have unique data. Even marks cannot be set because it also has duplication. Now, no single field has unique data. But I want to set the primary key because primary key is important. But the problem is individually, no field has unique data. So now what can I do? I can join 2 or more fields together to get the uniqueness, right? I repeat it. I can combine 2 fields or more than 2 fields together to get uniqueness. So assume I am going to link, or I'm going to combine these 2 fields, admission number and subject number. Earlier, we took every field individually and identified that they didn't have any unique data, right? So now I combine 2 fields together. So for example, I combine admission number and subject number together. So by combining 2 fields together, sometimes you can have duplication, you can have unique data. So when I combine these 2 data, my first data looks like this one. This is my first data. Have you understood? Now I join these 2 fields. So when I took individual data, 1001 was alone, right? 80 was alone. But now I combine them together. So now my first data is 100180. So tell me, will this data be repeated? Does my table have another record as 100180? Is it possible? Use your brain, use your intelligence. Is it possible? Will it be repeated? So how to identify that? So what's the meaning of first record? What does it mean? First record. What's the meaning of first record? 1001. What is it? Admission number. 80. What is it? Subject number. 76. So the first record tells us that 1001, which means a person, right? Assume that it is Vimal. takes 76 marks, obtains 76 marks for subject number 80, which means maybe ICT. So Vimal obtains 76 for ICT. That is the meaning of first record. So if you are writing the same figure again, 1180, which means you are trying to tell the same dialogue again. You are trying to tell 1001, which means Vimal, 80 ICT. So what did you write? You have to write 76 again. That is meaningless, because in a table you have to save only a relevant data. You cannot say first term, second term, third term, all the marks in a table. So this must have maybe one term. So now in the first record, you registered 75 for ICT for women. So if you are trying to write 1180 again, which means you are trying to write the same record again, because if it is 1180, definitely here also 76, because ICT for that person sat for ICT only once. So here also 76. Is it needed? No. So what is the conclusion? That 1180 never be repeated. Not only that one, even 100382, that is the second data, right? When you combine subject number and admission number and subject number, the second data is 100382. That never be repeated. Look at the third one, 1182. This never be repeated. So now I can say that in this table, every field, right, individual field doesn't have unique data. But when we combine admission number and subject number together, they have unique data. So this is called composite primary key. Not primary key, composite primary key, same, almost same. But primary key is a field, one field, a single field used to identify every record. But composite primary key is two or more fields, right? Two or more fields able to identify each record is called composite primary key. But in this table, admission number is not used for identifying each record. Subject number is not used for identifying each record. Marks is not used for identifying each record. But I can say admission number plus subject number. Admission number and subject number. Together, they can identify each record. Look, first record can be identified using 1180. When I call 1180, that record is identified. When I call 1382, the second record is identified. The third record is identified using 1182. Exactly same as the primary key definition. Take a look at the definition now. The primary key, which consists of two or more columns, which means fields of a table which uniquely identifies a record, is called composite primary key. So this definition is almost similar to the definition which I gave to the primary key. But in the primary key definition, I used singular, field. Primary key is a field used to identify every record uniquely. But here in composite primary key, I'm using plural word, two or more fields. The fields, right, the two fields or more than two fields, which are able to identify the records uniquely, are called composite primary keys. Have you understood? If it is primary key, only single key. If it is composite primary key, minimum two, right? Sometimes three possible. I will take some example later, but minimum two. Okay. So look at the description given here. Both ADNO and SUBNO are needed to identify a record in the above table, right? This is the one which I talked earlier. To identify the first record, you have to use these two data. 1001 cannot be used because 1001 repeated. Alone 80 cannot be because 8 is repeated. But when you use both together, it is possible to identify the first record, right? So what are they? They are admission number and subject number, right? So for identify a record, both ADNO and SUBNO are needed, right? That's why they are composite key. So when you write composite primary key, you have to write them together. Better put a plus in front, between them. Put a plus symbol in between both fields. Admission number plus subject number. Even you can put admission number and subject number. That is, even comma can be admission number, comma, subject number. But plus is the most appropriate method for showing composite primary key, right? ADNO plus SUBNO. Okay. So I hope that you can understand the composite primary key, but it would be easy if we take some example, right? Don't worry, even if you are unable to understand the concept, it is not the matter, because it would be easy when we take some examples. Okay, so we took 2 keys today, started from primary key, and later we took the composite primary key. But even though the names seem to be different, but almost they are same, right? Primary key, composite primary key. Even the reason for having these 2 keys is same, right? What's the reason? Identifying the records in a table. That's the reason. But primary key, it stands as 1 and identifies the record. Composite primary key is a combination of 2 or more fields for identifying records. Okay, so right, so this is very important for your exams, and even whenever you want to study database, you should understand the primary keys and composite primary keys and even foreign keys clearly, right? I didn't, or I couldn't explain the foreign key today, but definitely later I have to take some time and explain the foreign key along with these 2 keys, right? So this is enough for today, right? Because we took enough time to discuss everything. Okay, right.